Hi, ArcfieldWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Monday morning, December the 2nd. Certainly one of the coldest starts to the month of December in many, many years. If you go back the last 10 or 15 years or so, certainly this stretch from December 1st to, let's say, the 10th will be one of the coldest in those last 10, 15 years or so. In fact, yesterday, the first day of December was the coldest in places like Philadelphia in 25 years. You have to go back 25 years to find a December 1st as cold as it was yesterday in Philly, with high temperatures confined to the 30s. Certainly getting a lot of lake effect snows. We'll talk a little bit about that during this video discussion because that is not over yet, especially just downstream of Lake Erie. And we'll talk a little bit about clipper systems because we have a clipper system to deal with across the Great Lakes, the northeastern part of the country at midweek. But I thought we'd first start off by taking a look at the latest sea surface temperature anomalies. Now, again, we're into the month of December, and we do have a La Niña. It's relatively weak. I would say it's weak right now, with an overall temperature in the central part of the Pacific Ocean somewhere between a half a degree and 1 degree below the normal. Looks like it'll stay relatively weak. That is what I was kind of banking on for the winter forecast here. A relatively weak La Niña. Again, we do have colder than normal conditions extending from the west coast of South America all the way into the central equatorial part of the Pacific Ocean. But again, relatively weak, and it should stay relatively weak over the next several weeks. Certainly something we will continue to monitor. Well, if you go back to our winter outlook that we issued a few months ago, you will see that we did, in fact, kind of emphasize the weak La Niña. And this is the analog of several different winters that featured weak La Niña conditions and that actually had a El Nino in the prior winter season, and relatively cold. And certainly if you are rooting for some cold and snow in the eastern U.S., for example, you'd rather see a weak La Niña than a moderate to a strong La Niña, because in those kind of La Niña winters, moderate to strong strength, you often have a ridge over the southeastern U.S. And certainly we're starting off the month of December colder than normal without such a feature down in the southeastern states. And it looks like La Niña will stay relatively weak over the next several weeks. By the way, you can find this winter outlook right on our Outlooks page here. Go down to the seasonal outlooks and you'll see that winter outlook that was issued a couple of months ago. Well, let's kind of shift gears right now from the La Niña conditions in the Pacific Ocean to the Great Lakes, and we've showed this map last week. The water temperature of the Great Lakes still relatively warm, and with this Arctic air flowing overhead, you have a quickly destabilizing atmosphere. The buoyancy increases with the warmer waters underneath, causing some upward motion. And in the cases just downstream of Lake Erie, for example, and Lake Ontario, the snow rates have been quite intense, and it's not over yet. We're still getting some very impressive snow just downstream of Lake Erie. Some of these temperatures as warm as near 60 degrees. This is the scale right over here. You go to Lake Superior and you're down into the 40s. No ice as of this time, but again, a relatively warm water temperature. So with that flow of air in this fashion, you're getting that perfect setup for the Great Lakes snow machine to be in full throttle here. And it certainly has been over the last week or so, and it looks like it will be for at least another couple of days. Now, just to kind of go over the details as to how the lake effect snows operates. If you're in Buffalo, you want to see, and you, in order to get the most intense snowfall, you want to see the winds actually with a kind of a southwest flow that will produce the longest trajectory over Lake Erie as opposed to a northwesterly flow. This kind of a flow, let's say southwest or west-southwest winds, will bring the air over the longest part of the possible over Lake Erie and that could end up dumping a lot of snow on Buffalo. Right now, we're seeing basically a northwesterly flow of air, so this area just downstream of Lake Erie is getting blasted, and it looks like it'll continue to get blasted over the next 24 to 48 hours or so, with some of these areas in between Buffalo and Cleveland receiving another foot to 2 feet of snow over the next 48 hours or so. Well, in terms of ice cover, the Great Lakes during the last couple of winters featured very, very little ice. They were relatively warm winters. This is the maximum ice over the Great Lakes, where black represents zero, relatively close to zero ice. Very, very little ice on the Great Lakes last winter, and we go back to the one just before that here. Also, very, very little ice on the Great Lakes. Go to the prior one, and you have a little bit more in the way of ice over places like Lake Erie. By the way, Lake Erie is the shallowest of the lakes, so it can freeze over while the other lakes will not freeze over. And that happened 3 winters ago. In the winter of 2021 into 2022, we had a decent amount of ice over Lake Erie, but again, the last couple of winters, very little ice over the Great Lakes. Certainly, with this kind of a pattern, that is adding to the likelihood that we'll have much more in the way of frozen lakes down the road here. And that's important for a couple of reasons. First of all, any kind of a northwesterly flow that comes across the Great Lakes, if unfrozen, that cold air will modify as it climbs over the Appalachian Mountains and reaches the I-95 corridor region, for example. So with relatively warm Great Lakes, again, there could be additional modification compared to if the lakes were completely frozen. If these lakes end up getting completely frozen, the northwesterly flow of air will not modify quite as much as it would with the warm waters of the Great Lakes. So that's important. Now, can you still get lake effect snow if the lakes are frozen? Yes, you can. Won't be quite as intense as with the unfrozen lakes, but you can have what we call frictional convergence. The air actually would flow quicker over the ice, and then it starts to pile up on the land on the other side of the lake. So even with a completely ice-covered lake, let's say Lake Erie, for example, again, the air would flow very quickly over the ice, but then start to kind of pile up, what we call frictional convergence on the other side of the land, and that's where you could get some upward motion, and indeed you still can get lake effect snow, even if the lake is completely ice covered. Well, let's get back to the current situation now. Again, we have more lake effect snows, especially near Lake Erie, just downstream of Lake Erie. And this is a map of the near record lows or record lows right now. And it's quite an impressive cold shot we're experiencing from southern New England all the way into the Midwest, with some areas at or very close to record lows for the date, this being a Monday, December 2nd. So yes, very impressive cold air shot here for the beginning of the month of December. Now, one last map I want to show before we take a look at the 0Z run of the GFS. We will certainly talk about clipper systems quite often during the upcoming winter. In fact, this week we have a clipper system to deal with across the Great Lakes, Mid-Atlantic, Northeast U.S. at midweek, Wednesday night into the day on Thursday. Again, since we will talk about clipper systems, I'm sure quite often this upcoming winter, I want to just kind of do a little refresher course on what we mean by clipper systems. Sometimes they're referred to specifically as Alberta clippers, and this is the province of Alberta. Oftentimes, the low pressure areas start off in that part of Canada, the southwestern part of Canada. Basically, they move quickly, usually in a southeastward fashion across the Great Lakes towards the Mid-Atlantic region, towards the northeastern part of the nation, and they move quickly. That hence the term clipper refers to a fast-moving system. Now notice, There's not a lot of moisture available to this kind of a system. You do have moisture associated with the Great Lakes if indeed they're not frozen over. If you are in the I-95 corridor region, let's say from D.C. to Philadelphia to New York City to Boston, you can get decent snowfall in a clipper type of scenario, but that would typically happen if the clipper rides to your south. Let's say it goes south of D.C. If you're rooting for snow from a clipper system in D.C. or Philadelphia, you'd rather see that low pressure area go to your south, and that way it can actually tap in some Atlantic moisture and push it back with that easterly flow or northeasterly flow of air. This particular scenario, like I'm clear the page right here, the clipper system we'll see in a moment here is going all the way into the northern part of Maine. Hence, do not expect much snowfall. Can be snow showers, but nothing significant in a place like D.C., Philadelphia, even New York City. You have to go well up into New England to find the areas that likely will receive the more significant snowfall with this particular clipper system. Again, moving way up into the northern part of New England. If you're a fan of snow, you want to root for these clipper systems to dive to your south, and we'll of course monitor that during the upcoming winter season. Well, let's take a look at the 0Z run of the GFS. We're looking at the surface maps again from last night's model run here. As we begin the day here, we've talked about these blue dashed lines here, these thickness values, the 540 line all the way down across central Georgia, 516 cutting across D.C., Philadelphia, New York City. Very, very chilly air for this time of the year. And again, we saw some record lows or near record lows right in this region from southern New England all the way into the Midwest with this outbreak of Arctic air. Notice some blues still hanging around Lake Erie here, Lake Ontario just downstream. We do have a continuation of northwesterly flow of air over those still relatively warm waters of the Great Lakes, and hence some more significant snowfall over the next 12, 24, even 48 hours or so. Now, let's move forward in time here over the next couple of days here. Again, these streamers coming across the Great Lakes over the next 12, 24, even 48 hours or so. And here we go. By the time we get to later tomorrow, we're starting to see this clipper system right up here. Alberta, right over here. Alberta, that's province up in southwestern part of Canada. And again, this will move in this fashion over the next, from Tuesday into Wednesday. This is midday on Tuesday. And watch what happens with this clipper system. It drops to the southeast and again moves towards northern New England. Here we are now, late Wednesday night and into the day on Thursday. Again, if you love snow and you want to see substantial snow, you can get it on an occasional basis with a clipper system, but you want that low to dive to your south. In this case, it's heading towards the northern part of Maine here. Certainly can be some rain or snow showers associated with this system all the way down into New York City, Philadelphia, even the D.C. area, late Wednesday night into early Thursday, as this system intensifies and moves to the northern part of New England by midday on Thursday. Now, another thing I want to point out here, notice this pressure gradient that is forming right here between this incoming high and the intense departing low. Very tight pressure gradient here. These black lines are isobars, represent lines of equal pressure. In other words, the winds will become quite intense on Thursday on the backside of this clipper system as it departs, intensifies, and that incoming high comes in, causing this tight pressure gradient. Expect to see northwest gusts up to 40 miles per hour or so in the mid-Atlantic region. Certainly, wind chills will be a noticeable factor on Thursday. Go a little farther out in time by Thursday evening. Still very windy conditions here with this tight pressure gradient, and then we'll go into the end of the week and into the upcoming weekend, and it remains cold right through the upcoming weekend. Here's the Saturday morning forecast map. And then by the time we get to Sunday morning, notice this 540 line that this morning is all the way down across central Georgia, pushes all the way back to the north by the time we get to the latter part of the upcoming weekend. In other words, we'll certainly see a modification in temperatures by late in the weekend, early part of next week in the Middle Atlantic region, northeastern U.S. And then they have to deal with another clipper system by the early part of next week. That's it for now. For ArcfieldWeather.com, this has been meteorologist Paul Dorian.